man. Not another day like last Tuesday.
Cause it's Taco Tuesday.
Tuesday, Newsday.
The big news.
Welcome to Tuesday Newsday, where our learning goal is to determine two or more central ideas of a text and analyze their development over the course of that text, including how they interact and build on one another. At the end of today's article, you will be asked to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 4. A 4 means that you can identify the central idea or ideas. You can point to the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, and you're able to look at how the ideas build on one another. That's above and beyond. A 3 is where we'd like all students to be by the end of the year. And if you can do that, that means that you are able to identify the central ideas. You're able to point to the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, but you're not really looking at how those ideas build on one another. If you're at a 2, that means that you can identify the central idea, but you're not able to identify the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, which is a lot like not showing your work in math. Not showing your work in math and just getting the answer doesn't tell your teacher, much in the same way that just identifying the central idea but not putting into the evidence doesn't tell me that you're getting the process. We need you to be able to prove that you can understand the process. I don't know if this is news to you or if you knew this all along, but school is not about getting the right answer. Never has been and never will be. The right answer is a byproduct of having good processing skills. If you can identify the process, if you can work through a problem, you have good problem solving skills, you've got good critical thinking skills, then the right answer comes as a result of that. So school is all about that process and identifying that evidence. So that's where you're at if you're at a 2. And a 1 means you are unsure of how to find the central idea of the text, which is okay. Please tell me if that's the case. That is quite helpful because it tells me what I can do differently as I'm working through the article, talking through it with you. That maybe I need to point out quotes. Maybe I need to talk about main idea building moves that the author makes. So know this. This 4-3-2-1 is a bit of an assessment of you, but it's just as much or more an assessment of me because it helps me understand how I can better teach this particular skill. Hello and welcome to Tuesday Newsday. Today's articles, maybe more just the topic, is on the banning of books and why it is never the answer in the article on the left here, but then also why it happens in curriculums and why parents and school districts decide to do that. So we get two different perspectives. We're going to spend a lot of time today talking about main idea and how to get to that main idea, as well as tone and bias and how our biases kind of factor into the way that we write and our opinions. Right now, each of these articles is linked at the right in Edpuzzle, as well as the audio book. You do not have to listen to the audio book, but it is there for you if you so choose. Please take the time right now to read each article. Now that we have completed the reading of each article, let's take some time to complete the vocab assignment. On to the questions for the article. The first part, take a look at the titles of each of the articles and identify the topic. What do you suppose the topic of today's articles are? Remember that the topic is not the main idea. The main idea comes through in the details of the article. The topic and the main idea are different. How would you identify the topic based on the headlines? And on to summarizing the story. Summarize the first story in 12 words now. Summarize the second story in 12 words now. Summarize the first story in 32 words now. And summarize the second story in 32 words now. Onto first and last sentences in the articles. You have links to those articles, so finding out what these are and putting them into the question at the right should not be an issue. In the first article, what is the first sentence? In the first article, what is the last sentence? Article 2, what is the first sentence? In Article 2, what is the last sentence? On to main idea. What would you say is the main idea of these articles? If the main idea of each article differs, how would you say that they are different? Take a closer look at this quote. Reread it and answer the question, how does this quote support the main idea that you presented in the previous question? Reread this quote from Article 2 and answer the following question. How does this quote support the main idea that you presented in the previous question? Consider the differing opinions here. This is where we talk about tone and bias. Jay Asher says, I had a very innocent childhood and I feel very privileged by that. But as an adult, I know that there were people who didn't have that. There were lots of teens who hadn't had an easy childhood as easy of a childhood as me, and having literature that explores these darker parts helps relieve the burden and stress they may be feeling. As a writer, there is often a temptation to draw back when we write for teens to preserve their innocence. But the reality is, if someone has already had that innocence taken in their life, then not writing about it is just brushing it under the rug. Compare that with this quote. The teacher had received some parent concerns regarding the language in a couple of the books and some of the mature content, Harwood said by email. The teacher was not completely familiar with the contents of all the books, and after reviewing them, the teacher herself was not comfortable with the language, but instead gave parents, and the mature content in a couple of the selections. As such, the teacher decided not to make those required selections, but instead give parents the option of having their children continue reading them even with the language and mature content. One of the books, All American Boys, was cautioned due to mature language, and Monster was cautioned because of the mature content. Does this removing it from the curriculum brush the darker parts of life under the rug? Or is there a place for removing content that has too much language and mature content? Is that something that students should read? Or should we brush it under the rug and preserve their innocence? Consider the answer that you just gave to the previous question. Why do you feel the way that you do about that? And finally, consider the scale. Where would you rate your ability to determine the central idea of a text? Would you put yourself at a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1? Keep in mind that unless you can identify the tone and the bias in each article, you can't rate yourself a 4. If you identified that right away, you can put yourself at a 4. But if that was something that sort of was extra and maybe you didn't identify right away, you're probably at a 3. Thank you, and completion of this video earned you 1 unit for the day. Ciao for now.